All right, I thought it'd be helpful to give some memorabilia here. This gives you an idea of some of our really crafty, creative logos in the old days. You can't even read them. They're so small at the top. We didn't have a big budget, so what we did was to try to come up with anything we could to help promote the organization. And back then, there was no internet, or at least the internet wasn't used, so this was our newsletter, all right? And this was 1994. And the interesting thing about this newsletter is talking about our holiday meeting. There's an ad in here for Packstar. Packstar, you may remember, they were a packaging company. So if you sold software, you had to package it. So Packstar was a big packaging company. There's a usability center. There's some other folks that you might not see today. And again, this newsletter was all sent out by the mail. An example of their current logo and the old logo that we had. Now, this was actually an idea of the family tree. It's hard to read, but you may have seen this around town. We put this together in the early 2000s, and each color code represents a particular company and its offspring. And most of these are software companies. So you can see how, particularly, I think the blue was MSA, and you can sort of see how these companies have spawned over time other software and technology companies. But software really has led our growth. And who were the software companies at the time that were leading the way? Well, these were the companies, the key companies in town at that time, and really the companies that helped to create the software revolution in Atlanta. MSA, we talked about earlier. Management Science Atlanta becomes Management Science of America. The building is still in Buckhead. Hayes Microcomputer Products, Peachtree Software, Samna, leading word processing company. WebMD, we'll listen to Jeff Arnold in a moment. Internet Security Systems, Crosstalk. Crosstalk was the leading communication software product in the world. People would buy their Hayes microcomputer modem, throw away the SmartCom software, and buy Crosstalk. It was developed by a Georgia Tech student who got 10% of the company for writing a 16-bit version of Crosstalk, and was handsomely rewarded for it when we sold Crosstalk to DCA. The software link that I mentioned, Intelligent Systems. Does anybody know what Intelligent Systems did? They sold a product called the Six-Pack, and you could not drink it. The Six-Pack was a memory expansion board and a software diskette, and it sold like hotcakes in the 1983 Atlantic City Comdex. Brock Control Systems and McGee Enterprises. McGee Enterprises was a software company that had a software product that was in the genre called shareware. Anybody remember shareware? Shareware was a very interesting concept. You would get the software, they would literally send you the software for free. If you liked the software, you'd pay for it. If you didn't like the software, you wouldn't pay for it. And Marshall McGee created the concept of shareware. Unfortunately, too many people liked the software and didn't want to pay for it. But it was an interesting concept. Dennis Hayes is a very interesting person when it comes to the Southeastern Software Association. Of all the people, I think, in the country in the technology area, Dennis Hayes is probably, certainly at this time, was the best known technology executive in Atlanta. And Dennis helped to create an industry standard. Here's a picture of Dennis back at that time. Georgia Tech graduate, hair was a little long. Dennis put together a very interesting company. And so let's listen to Dennis talk today about what he did back then. And I'm going to back it up just one second so we can get this.
The first modem we did plugged into the S100 bus and used a number of standard parts, so it wasn't all that innovative. But when we asked the question, how do we bring that same functionality to any of the other computers that were not an S100 bus? We had to find a standard interface, chose the RS-232 25-pin connector, and had to find a way to control it to get the same kind of control we had as when we plugged a circuit board into the backplane. Well, that was the synthesis of the Hayes standard AT command set. That standard went on to be copied by all of our competition. We became the market leader. Our competition advertised being Hayes compatible. And eventually the International Telecommunications Union, which had previously been known as the CCITT, took that and made it into an international standard.
Did that sound like an engineer or what? Bill Goodhue Bill Goodhue became one of the early presidents of this organization, a global leader in accounting software. Was acquired by MSA, spun off in 1985, acquired by Sage, which is headquartered, their software unit here in town. So the Peachtree software name still exists. It's the longest running software trademark in the computer industry. Does anybody know how they came up with the name Peachtree for their software product? Well, Ben Dyer, who was the founder of Peachtree Software, said they hired a really high-powered, highfalutin advertising agency. They said, come up with a name. And the advertising agency sat there. They got up out of the chair. They walked out. They pointed the Peachtree sign on Peachtree, and they said, well, we'll use that name. And the name stuck. Let's listen to what Bill Goodhue said.
Get out of the business. They sent several of us over to Peachtree, which was just going down to the 7th floor in our office building, and to dress up the ugly daughter so that she could get married. And so trying to sell the system, the software company, and it was, the books were all set up so it could be easily a separate company and people could buy assets or whatever they wanted. So we really just divorced ourselves from MSA. We didn't think any more about that. We were just focused on making Peachtree an attractive purchase. But it took a long time to sell. It sold in pieces. International went one way and some educational products went another way. But the core business in the United States ended up being bought by Intelligent Systems in Norcross, which was, at the time, Charlie Munich was the chairman of Intelligent Systems, another tech entrepreneur who had a helicopter instead of a car, quite a guy, and a real hands-on soldering iron kind of engineer, and Leland Strange, who was the president, I guess, of Intelligent Systems at the time, essentially running the business. And so they bought Peachtree for $1.1 million, so $500,000 down and $600,000 to be paid a year later.
Which is pretty amazing when you consider that Peachtree Software as a product is probably the most pervasive software product in the country, maybe in the world. Saeed Mohammadian, another Georgia Tech graduate. Saeed had a very important problem. He was in the software business and president of this organization at a time when the operating system world was unclear. And there was an operating system called OS2 that Microsoft had, and there was an and Microsoft and IBM had, and then there was an operating system that in the background Microsoft was working on that happened to be called Windows. And Saeed said, well, you know, I don't know about this OS2. IBM's out there, yeah, Microsoft's talking about it too, it's sort of collaboration. I'm putting my money on Windows. Windows was announced by Microsoft. They dumped OS2. They pushed Windows hard. They didn't have a word processing product. Saeed had the only word processing product that would run in the Windows environment, and he took off like a flash.
I started out of Georgia Tech. I started working for Lanier Business Products, and there's a very clear line of demarcation between pre-PC technology and post-PC technology. Pre-PC technology, this was a pretty wild place in that, well, wild in the sense of being wilderness. There was technology happening in many parts of Atlanta, Scientific Atlanta being a very notable place. But it was pretty siloed, it was very proprietary, there was very little information going across companies, so it was hard to tell what was going on. On the other hand, there was a lot of innovative things were going on at the same time. It just wasn't as transparent. Post PC, then it all opened up, and we had a great big surge of technology companies in Atlanta, or about the time of personal computers, and companies became much more connected and able to tell where the opportunities were.
Now, what happened after this? What really occurred after the chapter of the microcomputer industry, software industry sort of closed down was the whole idea of the internet. Jeff Arnold was probably the most successful initial entrepreneur in this area. In about a year's time, took his company from a small company to one that was sold for $5 billion.
So it was about 1998, and we had our heart monitoring business. And all of a sudden, the internet showed up, and I think there was 85 million people online in 1998, and we said, wow, what a great new medium to share information. So this light bulb went off in our head, and we said, instead of being an EKG company on the web, why don't we build a homepage for health called WebMD? And I'll never forget, I was at a Atlanta business function, and I was in the audience, and they were honoring one of Atlanta's Entrepreneurs of the Year, and it was Bowman Jones, and I was in the audience listening to him, and still in my 20s, and I walked up to him afterwards, and I said, hey, I've got this great idea. I want to take these EKGs, I want to put it on the web. And at that time, Bowen's company, Premier, had just gone public in 1996, and he said, well, that's a great idea. Why don't we have breakfast? Next day, I had breakfast with him. The next week, he had given me a whole floor in his office, and we literally moved in rent-free, and we went from 2,000 employees to 1,800 employees in 18 months, and zero in revenue to 1.1 billion in those 18 months, all out of that free rental space that the CEO of one of Atlanta's great technology companies let us borrow.
It's a great success story, and Jeff still has an office. It's a little bit nicer office than he had back then. His Peachtree office is a corner office down in Buckhead. If you're in the Terminus building, you ought to go up and see him. Tom Noonan. We all know about Tom, but Tom has an interesting story about internet security systems and the leadership there in the software area.
Chris and I got together. We were effectively employee 1 and 2. We moved into the back of a warehouse in Norcross. Chris had been operating ISS out of his dorm room and out of his grandmother's apartment. And, one thing led to another, and we bootstrapped ISS at first. John Imlay came in after we maxed out our credit cards. I think the story is well known here in this town about my 37 Visa cards that we maxed out trying to get the company off the ground, but John put up the seed capital, and the rest is history. 14 years later, IBM pays $1.5 billion for us, some 4,000 employees operating in 48 offices around the world. Publicly traded on the NASDAQ and the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and really and truly a company that, when the history books are written with security, really brought security, intelligent security, into the mainstream of the internet. So I think ISS will always have a place, and Atlanta will have the place as a founding technology. And you can look around, there's over 100 security companies that have come through Atlanta or been started in Atlanta, and it's an epicenter of security in the world to this day.
So our golden years are really 1987 to 1999, and as we heard a moment ago, things really changed after the bubble burst. And what really did happen? Well, in the software community, both here and elsewhere, there were a number of things. Major software companies were sold or acquired in Atlanta. Most Atlanta tech companies became software enabled, and that pure play software companies like Samna, Peachtree, and others really almost disappeared. They lost their identity in town because they had been sold. The dot-com era ended, and the leadership pool was to a certain extent depleted as a result of that. And so where are we now? Well, we need to really redefine our constituency, and that's what we're doing now under the leadership of Kevin and your board here. What's a software company? It's hard to say right now. Maybe everybody's a software company. What's a tech-enabled company, and how does software relate? How do we accommodate end users and their software concerns, license and security? And in redefining our membership, who are our members? There's a whole new alphabet soup. CEOs, CIOs, Chief Technology Officers, Chief Risk Officers, Chief Security Officers, Chief Marketing Officers, a whole panoply of alphabet soup executives that have grown out of really the software business. So why do we exist? We heard earlier about that. We exist for information, for connections, for customers, for talent, economic development. And the organization really has a unique identity. We need to maintain that identity for several key reasons. Software still does drive Atlanta. At the end of the day, we can talk about a lot of other technologies. We can talk about biotech. We can talk about nanotechnology. It's great and it's important, but software is what has driven this community and continues to drive it. Georgia Tech is software driven, and any graduates from Tech know that are here. Software really is our future, and what can we do to help? Well, we can assist our outstanding leadership. We can be a part of the SSA blogosphere, promoting the organization, come up with new program ideas, and encourage others to join. Now, the question that might be asked is Atlanta still a great place to start and grow a software company? We're going to end by saying that the answer is yes, and we're going to hear very quickly from some folks. James Davis, a co-founder of Harbinger, a company that was sold for over $1 billion. Alan Tatel of Nora Mosley, today one of the leading venture capitalists in the country. Bill Nussey, the CEO of Silverpop. Trip Rackley, who founded 2 successful companies, Infront and Firethorn. Richard Brock, who's been around in the industry since the early 80s. Charles Brewer of MindSpring, Tom Noonan, and Joan Herbig. Let's listen to them quickly talk about why Atlanta is the place to start a software company.
I'm optimistic about Atlanta as a technology hub. I think we have, if you took a kind of a checklist of items of what do you need to have a successful leading edge community in technology, I think Atlanta has all of those items, has all of the checklist items.
I am optimistic about the future of technology in Georgia. I think that we have some great entrepreneurs and we've got great management talent.
I've done a lot of work in Silicon Valley and in the Boston, New York areas of venture capitalists, and no area, in my experience, is more open to networking, more collaborative, and has more of a sense of the greater good of the community than the Atlanta community. And I think that's something that evolves from the Southern culture, and quite honestly is one of the biggest reasons Atlanta is going to continue to grow and thrive in the technology area.
You know, we're as strong as they get in financial services. You know, we're as strong as probably the strongest in the security sector. And it seems like one of the biggest changes has been we've had more repeat entrepreneurs in the last decade. And that was probably one of the big knocks that I always heard about Atlanta. It's hard to find that anymore. I mean,
every year Atlanta becomes more international. It's not just Hartsville. It's just the people that move here, the companies that locate here. So you really can have an international, large footprint straight out of Atlanta.
You know, we have here a nice critical mass of people with the technical skills to make a technology company.
Now, I think we have an extraordinary opportunity here. I am more optimistic today than I've ever been, and that's why I stay engaged with the Atlanta technology community. I think we have a number of things going for us that really make us a destination city for not only technology businesses, but technology startups, new venture creation, etc. First,
I think Atlanta has a lot of strong points. I think one of the things at the top of the list would be location and access to air travel, for example. I think access to universities and talents that is not depleted but readily available is another great asset. I think it's a very accepting community. This is a community that wants to help one another, and I think that's really helpful for companies getting started.
Finally, I just want to thank everyone here for giving me the chance as a co-founder of this group to be involved with the organization, to be the keynote tonight. And I hope I've been able to impart a little bit of history about the organization and to highlight the fact that the best is yet to come. Thanks.